as we get acclimated to speaking in front of so many people. With being the director of amateur scouting for the New York Islanders, I travel all over the world, looking for hockey players at the age of 17 that are turning 18. And what happens then in my travels is on a Saturday evening or a Sunday morning, I find myself in a church. And I'm a self-proclaimed liturgical connoisseur. I'd just like to take a moment to say thank you to Father Duffner and Father Kowalczuk for their witness to Jesus Christ here. And anytime we're in the cities, this is the church we come to. This church is alive to us, and that's a compliment to all of you. It's just beautiful to come here and participate with like-minded people, so we thank you for opening up the doors. Now, the one thing that we did learn throughout the course of our hockey career is no matter how much money we made or how many years I played or goals I scored, money and fame did not equal happiness. And we're going to get into some of those details later. But I want to tell a quick story. Last summer, I enrolled back in school at the University of Minnesota. So, summer session, I moved in with my mom. My mother's here tonight. Wave your hand, Mom. I moved in with her. She kicked me out 2 weeks later. So my wife stayed at home with our kids, and my youngest daughter, who's in 9th grade this year, she played softball. So there was a softball tournament in the cities last year, and it was a Sunday morning. For those of you, I think it was the first week of June, you remember it, those of you who were at church, it was that morning we had that hailstorm. Okay? Yeah, I see it now. So we're coming to church. She had to go get my older daughter at a friend's house in Anoka, and I'm telling her to hurry up, and we just get underneath the entrance to the church there when the hail came. Well, Mass is over, she gets in the car, takes the kid back home. I go to my mom's house to prepare for school the next day, and I don't know, on Tuesday or Wednesday, talking to her, and she goes, Trent, you're going to get a phone call from a guy by the name of Tom Kapacek. And I'm like, who is this Tom Kapacek guy? Well, she says, I took the bulletin home from Mass on Sunday, and apparently there's this men's group that meet in a garage somewhere, and, well, I think you should go talk to them. So it's these two that the reason why we're here tonight. But the problem for my wife isn't the fact that she talked to Tom first. The problem from her is the fact that I talked to Tom second. So Suzanne and Tom, this is perfect. It played out to a T. You see, everyone here tonight thinks that they're going to hear us talk about theology of the body. That's what you think. But everybody here knows that we're actually going to hear about God's plan for our erotic desire from a woman's perspective. Thank you.
That's a good one. All right, so who here grew up watching Sesame Street? Raise your hand. Pretty much a lot of us here. I'm aging myself, I know. And y'all remember Bert and Ernie, right? Bert was kind of the type A one. He got really miffed at Ernie all the time, and he just kind of always had that look on his face, like he's like, didn't want anything to do with Ernie. I don't think there's a lot of Bert dolls sold. Do you guys think there's a lot of Bert dolls sold? I don't think so. And then there's Ernie, fun-loving Ernie, always dancing, having fun, totally oblivious to Bert. Well, Trent's Ernie, and I'm Bert. What's that? Oh, you're Bert, I'm Ernie. Sorry about that. I just screwed it up. So, but to be fair, I want to give you another analogy, okay? Imagine you're at the lake. Do you guys have lake homes? You go up north, and imagine that there's a dock in front of you. All right, and you're at the very beginning of it, and it's just so inviting. How many here would just run off that dock and do a huge cannonball? Raise your hand. Yep, I'm a cannonballer. Trent, on the other hand, would walk to the end of the dock, and he would dip his toe in, and he would make sure that it was just right. So I'm the cannonballer, he's the toe dipper. But the funny thing is, at the end of the day, who takes care of the cannonballers? The toe dippers, right? Usually in the hospital or something, because you've done something terrible. So this has been the case for us, our relationship. And to say opposites attract would be an understatement, really, concerning our years together. In fact, yesterday marked the 30th anniversary of our first date. Isn't that interesting? And as fate would have it, our first date was at Annie's Parlor in Dinkytown on the University of Minnesota campus, where we would later become student athletes, go Gophers, me playing softball and Trent being a competitive underwater basket weaver. He's more well known than I am with this hockey. And interesting, as a catechist, I do catechism, and I'm a small group leader to a lot of young women. And it's almost a given that they always want to hear about mine and Trent's relationship. I mean, we'll talk about Jesus, but it always usually turns around to us. They really want to know about our lives together. And I can hold my small group's attention for a long amount of time telling them how Trent wooed me with long love letters. You know, and one time he equated our love to as true as E = MC squared. And I was like, what does that mean? I had no idea. I had to look it up. There's no internet back then too, so that was painful. So, and in fact, so most recently, the Diocese of Duluth has a Theology of the Body retreat for the high schoolers, which is awesome. It's led by Father Mike Schmitz. Do you guys know who he is? Yes, he's awesome. We love him, don't we? Yes. So I've gone to a few of those, and I was holding a small group with these women, and I just nonchalantly said, well, my husband played in the NHL for 13 years. And they're like, what? Why haven't I heard about this? One of the girls, they literally blurted it out, and I didn't really think about it, that it's interesting to them. And I mean, yeah, and so one of the girls said, I would have never guessed you were an NHL wife. I was like, what? That one kind of hurt a little bit. I'm like, okay, well that's all right. And then one girl said, I've always wanted to marry an NHL star. And I was like, oh gosh. And they wanted to hear everything. So I was able to share with them 3 very important things that took Trent and I a really long time to figure out. One of them is what you do with your body matters, okay, even at a young age. What you do with your bodies sexually, it matters. Aside from your relationship with God, it is the most important aspect of your life. And what you choose to do with your bodies will determine majority of your happiness and joy. What Trent and I did with our bodies at an early age did matter. And I'll get into the details a little bit later. But that just cannot be stressed enough, whether you choose to live chastely or you choose to sin. Number 2, that money does not buy happiness. Because along with our struggles during Trent's 13 seasons in the NHL, we watched marriages literally fall apart right before our very eyes. And we all know that hockey players are the nicest pro athletes there are, right? They are. But it did not stop the infidelities or the cheating, okay? And the last but certainly not least and most important truth that I got to share with these girls that I was so happy to tell them is that my constant prayer to God during our time in the NHL was just asking Him to keep me grounded. And that this life is awesome, but it isn't reality. It's not how most people live. And God answered my prayers because for the next 10 years, we were pregnant 5 times, basically. So, and pregnancy clothes were very hideous back then. There was nothing cute about them. So I spent a lot of time being pregnant. And it was during Trent's career that we had a radical conversion back to the Catholic faith. That happened right then. So God heard and answered my prayers. And He was also at this time performing a slow open heart surgery on me, and He's still doing it. Why? From the wounds that I had inflicted on myself through the misuse of my body. God is repairing me, God is repairing Trent, and God is redeeming our bodies.
All right, so we have a couple goals here tonight that we'd like to accomplish if possible. One, we'd love to share with you what we've learned because it's just ultimately saved our marriage. So we're so excited to be here to share that with you. When we get to the point, we're going to actually give you some practicals that you can take from tonight to see if it can apply it to your lives at home. What do we expect from you in return? What I'm hoping happens tonight is that you just sit there and listen and see if you can't put yourself in our place. See if you can't see yourself in some of our wounds, because we're going to open up ourselves to you tonight, and we're going to show you where we were, and it's pretty ugly, but maybe some of you are there, maybe some of you were there, but the greatest thing of all is there is a hope, there is a bright light, and that's going to come near the end, okay? Now, what gives us credibility? I mean, why in the world should you listen to what we have to say? Not sure I have that answer. I can tell you, though, just a little bit, as you heard earlier, we are at the Theology of the Body Institute. We are being certified to teach on this. It's a long process. There's 8 week-long courses. It's going to take us many years to do it, but we're halfway there. I am also back, not at the University of Minnesota, but I am enrolled at Franciscan University, and I'm taking online courses to work on my theology degree. So I got an A in my first class, and I got an A so far in my second class. So far, I'm fooling them just like I fooled all my hockey coaches. Now, we don't intend to make anybody uncomfortable tonight, but chances are we might. And we don't intend to offend anybody, but sometimes the truth hurts. The one thing I can tell you is that we are not going to beat around the bushes when it comes to this topic tonight. We're respectively going to dive into the cure for the culture that we live in today. All right? Now, this isn't a guilt trip. We know darn well that when we point the finger at somebody else, we got 3 coming right back at us. We've been pointing the finger at ourselves for a long time, learning about this stuff. But I have to go backwards for a minute. I have to go back to a place so that everybody understands where we're going to start from. Okay? Now, you remember the homily that Father Duffner gave a couple weeks ago about the dandelion field? You know, the dandelions just keep coming back. In order to get rid of the dandelion, you got to get to the root. Okay, we're going to go to the root tonight if we can. And so I'm going to take a minute here, because I believe, this is my opinion, but I propose that all of these things that I'm going to list is caused by one bad decision. Okay, and it's been a snowball downhill from there. But we got to get there so that we can understand where we're at, so we can fix the problem. Okay, now I think everybody understands we live in culture of death. We do. I mean, it is what it is. So we have brought this upon ourselves. We suffer from gender ideology confusion. We suffer from same-sex attraction. It's a pandemic. It's not an epidemic. This doesn't happen just at Epiphany Church. It doesn't happen in Minneapolis, not just in the state of Minnesota or North America. This is a pandemic in the world today, and it's pornography. It is killing us as men and women. Okay, we all know, I believe, that it doesn't just stop at pornography where we just view something on a phone or a screen or a computer. It leads to masturbation. Okay? No-fault divorce, divorce itself, abortion, and we get back to 1930. Now, some of you know exactly what I'm going to talk about when I bring up the year 1930. But for those of you that don't know, in 1930 you had the Catholic Church and everyone under that umbrella. And you also had Protestantism under that umbrella. But the whole, both pieces, Catholicism and Protestantism, under the umbrella of Christianity. Okay? Catholicism for 1900 years and Protestantism for 413 years taught that contraception was a moral evil. Everyone. Until 1930. Talking about pill, talking about IUDs, I'm talking about vasectomies, withdrawal method, etc., etc., etc. Contraception puts a barrier between the total gift of self, and we're going to get into that shortly in some greater detail. It's so unbelievable, it's incredible. What is this total gift of self? What does it mean? What does it look like? And what is God's wonderful plan for our erotic desire? And when was the last time you had a man and a woman stand in front of you and teach it? Ready? Here we go. I got a question for you. Okay, we're going to start here. Who here was raised in a Christian home? Can I see a show of hands? that looks just about like everybody, okay? Who, in their Christian upbringing, had open, honest, healthy conversation with mom and dad about God's glorious, stupendous, wonderful plan for erotic desire. Can I see a show of hands? 3, 4 maybe. 98% of us, 98% of us, when it comes to what JP2 calls the very core of our humanity, that which defines us as human beings, this restless hunger and yearning for love, and who here doesn't want to be loved? We all do. When it comes to this fundamental hunger, almost all of us were raised on the starvation diet gospel. You see, we got next to nothing. And so it's understandable that the secular world's fast food gospel starts to look very attractive to us. And what I mean by fast food gospel is the culture's promise for immediate gratification for the hunger.
Alright, so a few years ago I thought I'd be a real cool mom and bring my kids to go see Twilight. You guys all familiar with that movie, Twilight? Right. And as parents, you know it's super uncomfortable to be next to your kids when like a steamy scene comes on and you're like, oh my gosh, I just wanted to leave. And I guess the scene was evidently very highly anticipated because the two main characters were going to take it to the next level. And the scene was so violent and so unrealistic that it actually made me cringe. And and what was even more shocking than that was the fact that the girl behind me, after it was done, actually, before I say that, during the scene, Edward ripped the headboard off the bed, and I was like, oh my gosh. And to make things even more shocking, the girl behind me said, is that it? She was just a teenager. Is that it? And I'm like, he broke the headboard. What are you talking about? And I didn't say it to her, but I did turn around and I think I gave her that look, you know, like, are you serious? Come on. But the whole point about this true and shocking story is to show how Satan's lies and distortions have played into our sexual urges and desires. Our desires and urges are real and they are God-given. The most powerful force in human nature is our sexual urges and attraction to the opposite sex. We want answers to our questions, to our innermost desires and urges, which we know can make us do some crazy, lovesick things. Like the time when I was 14 years old, and I stalked this boy named Jason at Valley Fair all day long. I did. And somehow I managed to get his phone number. I don't know how I did it. I'm sure it was so annoying. Then I proceeded to spend the whole summer pining over him. And I hadn't even talked to him, unless you take into consideration the fact that I called him, I pranked him just to like hear his voice. Did anybody ever do that? Like prank call somebody just to hear their voice? Oh, the things we could do before caller ID. You kids back there, you guys have it easy, because you can like stalk your crush on Instagram, and now you got this thing called Snap Map. You can actually know where they are. Like, that's so creepy. It's true, right? You can like pull it up and you can see where like, yep, everybody's going, yep. Yeah, so you guys have it easy. So we do things that are so lovesick. So what to do with all these feelings and emotions? It can be exhausting. And I remember these feelings very vividly. It's what we do with these urges that matter. I remember at a very early age of 5 knowing that I was attracted to the opposite sex. And I was attracted to the drummer Mickey from the Monkees. Did anybody else do? I mean, like to see it now, I'm like, I can't believe it. I even thought he was cute, but I did. And it's not uncommon to anybody sitting here that we have sort of a fascination with the opposite sex. So within the last year, I've done the bold task of intentionally asking Jesus to show me my wounds created by past sexual sins. And I knew I needed to do this in order to let Jesus start transforming my heart. And this can be intimidating at first, because in our humanity, sometimes we want to shield ourselves from the pain of memories, or strangely, we want to hold on to the wounds and not let Jesus do his work. Jesus always has bigger plans for all of us when we seek his counsel. It turns out that not seeking Jesus' help and sitting in our wounds is quite boring. Because not only does Jesus show us our wounds, He may even show you the wounds of the perpetrators. So not only was I able to deal with my wounds, I was able to pray for those individuals who had hurt my innocence instead of harboring a huge, bitter grudge. Our Lord is so good. When I was 10 years old, the summer after our family had lost my little brother Michael in a tragic accident, another tragedy happened in my life, and my innocence suffered a small death by a fellow childhood friend that we lovingly called Crazy Nathan, because of how outlandish he was. He was totally outlandish. My identical twin, Kirby, and I were on a nature hike with our friend in his spacious backyard, and that was when he showed us pornography for the first time. To say that we were shocked would be an understatement. I vividly recall looking at the photo with a certain fascination because I had never seen a grown man naked before. The intrigue turned to horror when Crazy Nathan announced to Kirby and I that he would be calling my father and letting him know at all the pictures that we were looking at. And we ran home 1 mile, honest to Pete, ran into our bedroom, shut the door, and we hid. Isn't it interesting? 10 years old. I can only guess that we were despairing over our loss of innocence. I specifically remember feeling a huge sadness in the pit of my stomach for what I had seen. And the closest thing that I can compare it to is the feeling that you have in the pit of your stomach as you're standing over a loved one in a casket. It's that sick ache. And I can hear God telling me in my ache, sweetheart, both these things, death and loss of innocence, were never meant to be. Men and women, it was never meant to be this way. The reason why pornography is so wildly popular is that because it directly contradicts the beautiful one-flesh union shared between spouses. Instead of the beautiful one-flesh union, you turn it in on yourself. I once heard a wise priest say, this is his words, I get irritated when people say, I cannot imagine why anybody would ever look at pornography. It's so disgusting. And then he says, if it was so disgusting, then nobody would ever look at it. There's something alluring about it. I think it's safe to say that majority of the people here, right here tonight, have their own pornography stories. With these stories also come wounds. A door was opened into my impressionable young heart, and to be brutally honest with you, my most alarming sins occurred during my teenage years, and it was way before the internet. And sadly, my choices would set the stage for mine and Trent's marriage. What you do with your body matters, even if you think nobody's watching. Well, the following years would be filled with instability and sexual angst. I allowed myself to be used by boys, and I also used them myself. I also developed an eating disorder for 3 years. I regularly looked at pornography, and with this hobby came another hobby that usually goes hand in hand, no pun intended. Instead of calling masturbation, I'm going to call it a little wordplay and call it clog dancing, just not to make people feel uncomfortable. So I discovered clog dancing. And it'd be more appropriate to say that it discovered me. And nobody was talking about it at school. So I figured I was probably the only one that was even doing it. And the funny thing is that it can escalate into a powerful addiction. And it comes with a certain amount of shame. I mean, you could never announce it at the kitchen table. Hey, Mom and Dad. You know, they'd be horrified. And it turns out that it's more common than any of us even care to think, due to our nation's chronic loneliness and their addictions to pornography. In a recent article called The Death of Eros, penned by famed sociology professor Mark Regreneris, he states that since 1992, the increase of women who do this, at least weekly, has increased 275%, and men 100%. Now you say, what's the big deal? It's not hurting anybody. And to this I say hogwash. At the very least, you're training your powerful brain to be sexually stimulated and to orgasm to pixels on a screen, pictures in a magazine, or your own fantasies, not a living, breathing human being. And this can have profound consequences within a marriage, especially within the marital embrace. Are you with your spouse, or are you in your mind? I'd love to be able to tell you that Trent and I were complete angels when we started dating. I really do. What we lacked was the awareness of our God-given dignity. I am sure somebody talked about purity and chastity at CCD classes, but I just don't think we were listening, nor did we want to listen. Are you listening? This is the most important truth that you will not hear outside of your home or your church.
So I just want to real quick introduce this theology of the body, just so we know the people we're talking about. Karl Wojtyla was the Pope of the Catholic Church, I believe from 1978 till about 2004. And the very first work that he performed was this theology of the body. So over 129 Wednesday audiences and a 5-year timetable, this is what he produced. It's man and woman, he created them. And this is the teaching, okay? To go back to the timeline that I mentioned last time I was up here, contraception started to fall in the year 1930. For those of you old enough to remember, in 1968, there was immense pressure on the Catholic Church to fall on this teaching as well. And a lot of people thought the Catholic Church was going to fall. Pope Paul, I think it was Pope Paul VI, came out with the encyclical Humanae Vitae and said that the Catholic Church was going to uphold the teaching that contraception is a moral evil. Okay, if anybody wants to know why the Catholic Church upheld the teaching, here you go. This is going to give you every answer to any question you could possibly have on why the church teaches that, okay? In 1993, a guy by the name of Christopher West was able to devote the rest of his life to this teaching. He's the one that started the Theology of the Body Institute, and he wrote this book, which is Theology of the Body for Beginners, which I would highly recommend any one of you to grab if you're not familiar with it yet. This is language that Trent and Kelly can understand. This is, I still haven't got very far. It's kind of out there. He's a really intelligent man, okay? So, theology is the study of God, correct? Theology of the body is the study of how God reveals himself to us through our bodies. And JP2's thesis statement is this. I'm just going to read it to you. The body, in fact, and only the body, the Pope says, is capable of making visible what is invisible, the spiritual and the divine. It has been created to transfer into the visible reality of the world the mystery hidden from eternity in God, and thus to be a sign of it. Wow. In other words, somehow the body enables us to see spiritual realities, even the eternal mystery hidden in God. Okay? George Weigel, who's a Catholic theologian, says this: the theology of the body is a theological time bomb set to go off with dramatic consequences, perhaps even in the 21st century. You want a cure for the culture of death? I believe I'm holding it in my hands right here. Okay? Now, I got another question. Men, and I hope I'm not the only one. You ever stood in the shower, naked, looked down, and wondered, why am I made this way? Am I the only one? Apparently I am. Women, you can't giggle. Your bodies make no sense all by themselves either. Okay? Only a woman's body can reveal to me a man, and only a man's body can reveal this to a woman, that we are called to Holy Communion. That is so potent and so powerful that in the normal course of events, this union leads to a third.
Lots of information tonight, isn't there? You're bearing with us. So does anybody here remember the 90s smash hit War of the Roses? Do you remember that movie with Michael Douglas and Kathleen Turner? Yeah. It was, it was an interesting story. These people were empty nesters. Their kids are gone out of the house, and you can just tell from the get-go that they are not getting along. In fact, one of the scenes that sticks out to me is they're sitting at this long table in the dining room area, and Kathleen Turner's here, and Michael Douglas is way down at the other end. He's just eating his food, and it's super annoying, and Kathleen Turner's just looking at him like, ooh, you are so annoying. And you can just tell the movie just spirals, and this couple just finds themselves in fact, there's one scene where Kathleen Turner is swinging from a chandelier and she literally drop kicks him in the face, Michael Douglas. And I just thought, I remember watching this as a young bride and I thought, how can people who love each other ever turn out this way, you know? I mean, they took the marriage vows, but these people, they just cannot stand each other. And it's interesting, now I know how two people could come to this because we actually went through that. You know, it was there, it was part of our life. There's a saying out there that says marriage is where good people come to die. Now, that may sound a bit harsh, but seen through the Christian lens, it makes some sense. If marriage is a small reflection of the Trinitarian love and Jesus suffered and died for our sins, you better believe that there will be a little amount of suffering within a marriage. I should know I suffer every day. Now I know why my beloved mother took my hand in the bridal room lovingly before I walked on the aisle and gently said, "This will be the hardest thing you ever do." And I was like, "Gee, thanks, Debbie Downer." There I am, you know, dressed in my bridal gown. Oh my gosh. What my mom said to me that day, though, wasn't far from the truth, and she said it out of love. And it's an objective truth that the sacrament of marriage is a very, very powerful sacrament. And God will shower many blessings on and graces to help, but He desperately desires us to turn to Him and ask for His help and guidance. Now, I've already been very open with you about my wounds and emotional baggage. What I'm about to tell you all is that it followed me right up to the altar. The honest truth is that we both entered this marriage completely broken. Trent with his own sets of sins and complications stemming from his parents' complicated divorce, his insecurities. And if our bodies would have reflected our souls on our wedding day, we would have both been on life support. Unfortunately, our marriage prep was a joke, and I don't even recall being advised to go to confession before the sacrament of marriage, which is so important. The sacrament of marriage is powerful, but without repentance for past sins and a firm resolution to turn away, it can kind of turn into a hot mess really fast. And nobody goes into marriage thinking, "Oh, I'm gonna get a divorce." Nobody does that, you know? We're all thinking of the future. We're thinking of hope. We're all full of hope. So even within the sacrament of marriage, we will continue to seek joy. We will continually seek out the answers to the questions, how can I live my life in a way that brings me true happiness? The quick answer to that is to love as God loves, in sincere self-giving. Hence, where good people come to die. Blessed are you familiar with Archbishop Fulton Sheen? You guys? Yeah, I see a lot of heads nodding. He likens the beginning of marriage to a lump of coal. Imagine a lump of, what happens to the lump of coal when it goes through fire. It comes out like a diamond. And that's marriage. We have to go through those tribulations for us to come out like diamonds. If we somewhat understand that this much of the suffering felt during marriage can be redirected to sanctify each other in our family, it will become much easier. And this is good news. This is a grace that's to be had within our marriages through the sufferings of our marriages. And we know that we are faced with sufferings every day. Some big, some small. So work through your problems and God will bless us abundantly. And the Catholic Church loves the sacrament of marriage. The Church holds it to such high esteem that she calls it a primordial sacrament of all sacraments. What does that mean? Because all of the sacraments hinge off of God's gift to married couples being able to create new life together. Think about it. We get to be co-creators in God's eternal plan. How cool is that? And if we dare to open up our eyes, we will see that all of creation is exploding with God's creative ability. You just need to step outside to see proof of that. Have you ever taken time to notice that nature does not wait for man's yes to procreate? It just goes on. There are eggs being laid. There's crickets chirping love songs to one another. There's pollen in the air. There are cats procreating. I'm just kidding. Nobody's actually ever seen that. We hear it in the middle of the night, though. You guys hear it, like, oh my gosh, what does that sound? And I know we don't like to think about it, but if it wasn't for the fact that your parents became a one flesh union, you wouldn't be sitting here right now. Your parents became co-creators with God. In fact, there are people in the world right now being co-creators with God. So it's truly awesome. God bestows his gifts on couples, and all he desires is that we love him and we love our spouses with a true, honest love.
Okay, so in this teaching, JP2 looks at 3 key words of Jesus to paint a picture for us about who we are as men and women, why we are made male and female, and why we are called to become one flesh. Okay? Perhaps you remember the story of the Gospels, when the Pharisees approached Jesus to question him on divorce. They say, Moses allowed us to divorce our wives. What say you, Jesus? Jesus says, Moses allowed you to divorce your wife because of your hardness of heart. But, and this is the key phrase, but from the beginning, it was not so. So I want everyone to look at this white piece of paper right here, okay? And I want you to think for a second what the most beautiful painting in the world this could possibly be. Just think about whatever it is, whether it's you're laying on a beach in the Cayman Islands, or morning sun, or you're up at the cabin and you're watching the sunset. What is the most beautiful painting ever created in the world? What would it be? I'm not going to ask you for your thoughts. I'm just going to tell you. The crown of all creation, the most unbelievable created painting in the world, is man and woman, naked, in the beginning, when they felt no shame. So following the words of Jesus, JP2 reflects at length on the original picture of man and woman when they were naked without shame. Matthew 5:8 says this, Blessed are the pure of heart, for they shall see God. Adam and Eve in this picture, or this painting, when they were naked and they looked at each other, they saw God in their naked bodies. It's pretty awesome. You see, theology of the body is simply just another way of saying that we are made in the image and likeness of God. Only in light of each other, as in this painting, can man and women discover the meanings of their own bodies. We are called to Holy Communion. Okay? Now, I want to take a look at one word for a second. I want to take a look at the word love. What do we love? In the English language, we have one word to describe love, really, and it's love. We love pizza, we love duck hunting, we love hockey, baseball. I mean, you name it. When we really like something, we just say we love it. Okay? In the Greek language, there's 4 words. I'm just going to go through them real quick. Storge is a maternal or a paternal love. It's a love a parent has for a child, or a child has for a parent. Okay? Just going to draw some distinctions. Filio is another kind of love. Philadelphia is the city of brotherly love. I coached the hockey team for the last couple of years, and I could tell my players that I loved them. And I explained this to them in the locker room, and they looked at me like I was retarded, but they got it. And so there's a distinction. I can love my hockey players differently than I can love my own children. The third word is eros. That our English word erotic is derived from eros, and that's the love that I feel for my wife, or that she may feel for me, or men have for women, and vice versa. Okay, so we can draw some more distinctions to understand that I can love my wife differently than I can love my hockey players, differently than I can love my mom or my children. Okay? Agape is that love. Right there on the cross. Self-sacrificial love. It's the all-encompassing love. It's the love where he laid his life down for us. Now, I can love my wife with eros, but I can also love my wife with agape too, can I? I mean, if somebody's trying to go after her, you're going to have to go through me, right? Someone's going to try to go after my daughters, they got to go through me first. I pray all the time for the strength and the courage that if ever faced in that situation, that I could do what he did. Okay? Now, that's kind of a couple different words to describe love. What is the definition of love? Does anybody know what the definition of love might be? JP2 says the definition of love is to will the good of another. So next time you say, I love you, to someone, ask yourself the question, do you will their good? It happened last night. Now, one of the pet peeves I have at home is I don't like a messy kitchen, and I'm not saying the kitchen's messy. I have been at fault sometimes for telling her that the kitchen's messy, and she says, why don't you clean it yourself? So last night, I'm sitting here thinking to myself, she was doing some work, and okay, I love her, I cleaned the kitchen for her. I willed her good so she wouldn't have to. I confronted a young gentleman from back home a while back about cohabitating prior to his marriage, because I told him that he was jeopardizing his soul and jeopardizing his fiance's soul at the same time. And his response to me was, really, Klatt, are you kidding me? Are you telling me you didn't live with Kelly before you got married? I said, yes, I did. And no one said anything to us either. And I'm not proud of it. Now the question I have for you is this. Was I loving him when I confronted him about living with his fiancée before they got married?
Yes.
Yeah. And that's where that truth hurts sometimes, right? So, now we've heard what the definition of love is. Anyone want to guess maybe what the opposite of love is? Most people, when I ask the question, they say, oh, it's hate. No, could be, but what JP2 goes into great length talking about in this teaching is the fact that the opposite of love is to use. So if I will her good, the opposite is to use her. I'm taking something from her, and I'm using it for myself. The easiest example I can use, we've been talking about it a little bit, is pornography. Now, you're taking something, you're turning that arrow in on yourself, and you're using it for your own pleasure, okay? In the beginning, God created us as sexual beings, as male and female, and gave us this erotic desire to be the very power to love as God loves. This call to love, it's the summary of the whole gospel. I mean, it's the new commandment Jesus gives us, right? To love one another, how? As I have loved you. Now, how did Jesus love us? He said to his bride, the church, this is my body given for you.
Time's just a-flying. Trent's like, we gotta go, we gotta keep going. So, 18 years ago, I found myself in the labor and delivery room with one of my best friends, Anne Marie. She was in pain. She was in the throes of labor pain. And she was a tough cookie, too. She was a former Division I athlete, lacrosse player. And she was in agony. And in her agony, she yelled out what I think every woman in the history of mankind has yelled out. Why does this hurt like H-E double hockey sticks? And without missing a beat, her tough as nails, spicy nurse, the big crucifix on her, she turned to her and she said, well, if Eve would have eaten that apple. And I'll never, ever forget that, because as I'm standing there in the labor and delivery room, I'm thinking about the creation story. And I'm like, yeah, why did Eve eat that apple? Now we gotta put up with annoying husbands, labor pains, liberal feminists. I'm just kidding. This isn't gonna be political. So aren't we all a little bit baffled by the creation story? I mean, God graced him with super abundant gifts, including free will. And he had one command. He said, do not eat from the tree of knowledge. And I think we all wonder, why, oh why, Eve, did you eat from that apple? You were in paradise. And shame on you, Adam, for letting her do it. Now it's just all this stuff has happened. And it's funny how we take comfort in thinking that we would have never eaten the apple, right? If I was in the garden, I would have never eaten that apple. And it's so easy to say because we know the consequences of it, right? And it's funny because we know that that happened up there on the cross, and we still choose to sin, right? That's pure insanity. So let's not be so hard on Eve, huh? So I want to play a little fill in the blank game with you to just drive home my point, okay? I'm going to say a few biblical words and you're just going to fill in the blank, all right? Matthew, Mark, Luke, and
John,
the Virgin,
Mary,
the prodigal,
Son,
original.
Sin.
Why didn't you say original innocence? All right, that came before original sin. And people hardly ever give it a thought. We always hear about original sin. What the heck was going on in the garden before the fall? Some of you may equate the garden with bodily perfection, like Eve never had a weight problem, she never probably had to pluck her eyebrows, and Adam looked like Fabio with hair flying in the breeze. No, it was much, much better than that. Before the fall, Adam and Eve lived in complete peace, trust and intimacy. Adam and Eve saw the mystery of God's love revealed through their bodies, and God chose to create them in his own image and likeness. And he created them male and female, and their bodies told a story. And we don't need to be biology majors to figure that one out, do we? So, do you want to know something astounding? JP2 proposes that an echo of the beginning exists in all of our hearts. An echo. It's there. JP2 says that the original human experience that Adam and Eve lived before the fall is always at the root of every one of our experiences. Indeed, they are so interwoven with ordinary things in life that we generally don't even realize their extraordinary character. Along with this echo is an ache that can never be satisfied here on earth. Anyone here, by a raise of hand, remember some time during their lives having a complete meltdown and just an ugly cry? Ladies, you're not fooling me. Raise your hands. We are crying because at the very core of us, we are longing for God. Or we have our periods, one of the two. We are longing for God. And the echo followed by the ache subconsciously points us to the beginning in the garden. It's all there, and it's so intense. And you can take this for what it's worth, but I heard one time that that's why babies cry so often. Their ache and their echo is so intense because they're so close to God. So we must always balance the bad news of original sin with the good news of the redemption. The good news is that 2017 years ago, Jesus came into the world not to condemn us, but to save us. Jesus came to redeem our bodies. If we have been riding around on flat tires since the fall, Jesus came to inflate them back. And he does this by appealing to the beginning. In the beginning, it was not so. Jesus' reference to the garden and original innocence is the capstone to his saving ministry here on earth. In the Catechism of the Catholic Church, it states, Jesus came to restore creation to the purity of its origins. That is what he came to do. To unravel the lies and show us how to live by everything he taught in the Gospels.
So this is the beginning. This is the purity of our origins, okay? And we all know that this didn't last very long, right? JP2 has a quote that says this: as the family goes, so goes the nation, and so goes the world in which we live. If there is an evil one, and if there is an evil one that doesn't want us to live in harmony here on earth, if he doesn't want us to join our Father in the heavenly banquet, what do you think he thinks of this picture?
Worst thing ever.
He hates it. He despises it. And he desires to do nothing but ruin it. How do you think he's doing in the world right now? He's doing pretty good. So what happens? Satan points all of his arrows right here at this picture. And this is the view of our sexuality in the world today. It becomes terribly twisted and distorted, and we walk around in this state broken. Broken and broken. And because we've been raised on the starvation diet, gospel, This is our view of the world. JP2 says this is the second discovery of sex. Now they are ashamed of their bodies, but not necessarily about the bodies themselves, but they're ashamed of what's going on in their mind, and specifically what's going on in their heart. This teaching comes from Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount. Matthew 5:28 says this, everyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery in his heart. Ouch. That one hurts. My wife knows. We've been through this. And every woman here knows that you are not to be looked at as an object to be used for someone else's pleasure. Just going to kind of go back quickly here to a place where I was. I'm just going to flay myself open here. Just bear with me. Now, we all know men and women don't have equal amounts of desire when it comes to spousal union. I thought very early on in my life, and I'll admit it, if you'd asked me what the definition of love was, I would have said it was sex. You know, if my wife loves me as much as I love her, then she should desire that as much as me. Nope. I mean, what man wouldn't hope for that? So problem number one was I didn't know what the definition of love truly meant at the time. Problem number two, when I was playing, I had these problems and desires and urges, and she wasn't necessarily there when I had them. I was learning that I had to make a total gift of myself, and I can't make a total gift of myself to myself. Doesn't work. Problem number three was I was on the road. Normally, wasn't out of the realm of possibility to have 7, 8, 9-day road trips. And she wasn't there when I had these urges. So I can remember in those days getting very frustrated with God, because how am I supposed to deal with this when she's not there? Problem number four was living in a world where I didn't see how others were handling their problems, but I heard about it. And I knew what was going on. The hockey locker room with 23 naked men, they're just nothing that we don't know about each other. Okay? So I was exposed to groupies, strip joints, pay-per-view movies, hotels in 29 other cities that my wife probably never going to visit. I didn't know what JP2's definition of love was at the time, but I knew what I was seeing and living wasn't it. To set the record straight, I'm not saying I never went into a strip club, can't say that I didn't order a pay-per-view movie, but I didn't indulge ever in any adulterous situation physically, just so y'all know that. How I got through that is nothing short of God's grace. I can thank the good Lord for that. With, at this time, 2 or 3 kids already flying out of my wife, we came across and very interested in natural family planning. And it was about this time when I figured out that clog dancing is not accepted. I'm like, Lord, you've got to be kidding me, I'm supposed to abstain? Really? I mean, she's got that down pat. But me, that was difficult. Okay? I get home from road trips and it's like, give me that chart. There's no way you're ovulating right now. I didn't trust her, but so we had a couple more kids. So at this point, I'm really starting to get mad. Okay, I'm trying as hard as I can to live the way I'm supposed to, and it's just not making sense. I can't figure it out. But as my relationship with Christ grew, so did my understanding of his plan. Let's see, we're made in God's image and likeness. The first thing God says in the Bible is to be fruitful and multiply. I have a wife, we're sexually active, we're on our way to 5 kids, yet when it comes to consummating our marriage, it's nothing short of unfulfilling. It's empty, and it's shallow. And these are just some thoughts that I have going through my head. She's not participating in the act. I can tell. She's there in body, but there's a humongous disconnect, and I can sense it. I'd lay in bed, feeling puzzled. Like, Lord, what am I doing wrong? I can tell that I'm using her. I can tell. But I don't know how to fix it. I don't know how to change it. Why is it, as I learn more about this primordial sacrament, this sign that points us to our heavenly destiny, why is it over so cotton picking soon? It's just not right. What am I doing wrong? I don't get it. She never seemed satisfied. Neither one of us are emotionally satisfied. And I would fall asleep trying to answer these questions. This whole stinking thing about sex, Lord, is driving me nuts. It doesn't seem right. It's unfair. Come on. I'm all alone. Like, who in the world am I going to talk to about this? I don't know anybody to talk to. This isn't love. I don't know what it is, but this thing that I'm experiencing isn't it. And ultimately it got to the point where I accused her of not loving me. The dark days of our marriage, I said that to her. What am I doing wrong? It got to the point where I said, God, this sex thing that you made, well, it sucks.
Has anybody ever seen the movie As Good as It Gets? That is a great movie. And there's a shot of Jack Nicholson. He thinks he's having a heart attack, but he's actually having a panic attack, and he's in the emergency room, and he's just wild because he's so type A. And he's just laying there, and he looks around, and he goes, is this as good as it gets? And I think anybody who's seen that movie is just like, oh, you felt that. I felt that. I felt that in my own marriage. There are many times that I wanted to shout at the top of my lungs, is this as good as it gets? As much as Trent and I have been able to deal with our marriage problems and learn theology of the body, it's just never easy to hear him say the stuff he told you guys, and the fact that he was using me within our own marriage. However, there's always two sides to the story, right? As any good divorce court judge will tell you, there's always two sides to the story. And the truth was, I was allowing it to happen because I had set the stage a long, long time ago, before we had even said our vows, with choices I had made with my own body. Unrepentant sin and deep wounds had followed us our marriage right up to the altar and unleashed its fury during our years together. Now looking back at our early years, I can clearly see that there was something deep inside of me eating away at me that made me so utterly sad. I felt I was failing miserably at marriage, mostly because of my confusion stemming from our marital embrace, and our house was becoming like a war zone. Kind of a little bit like War of the Roses with the chandelier. I really wanted to do that to him. Throw some kiddos in there, 5, you got yourself a hot mess, and that's exactly what we had. I was pulling away, and his sexual appetite did not back down. It was just, it was hard. And it was starting to eat away at Trent. Like he said, after we'd consummate our marriage, he'd say, just something does not feel right. And that statement couldn't have been more true. I was becoming repulsed at the notion of the marital embrace because of my unresolved wounds. Now, excuse me for being a little blunt, but I need to address all of you with something that may seem like a little bit too much information, but there are souls in here that need to hear it, and it stings a little bit, so young people, bear with me. It is no mystery to married women sitting here that the man's sexual arousal is much quicker than ours. It's no mystery, right? Help me out here, ladies. Gosh. It takes us gals some time to get into it. Now imagine adding into the sexual mix a couple who have greatly drifted apart because of an array of reasons, and there are many, we can all name them. And a husband who still has sexual urges. And quite frankly, as women, we would gladly live out a celibate life at a lovely convent on the hill. It's okay, we can laugh, you guys. Well, Trent and I found ourselves in this predicament, and instead of entering the convent, I would literally just check out. I would just check out. This is how I dealt with our loveless embrace, just to get through it. And now I'm not trying to project myself, I knew other women, but it's not uncommon for us to do this. It's not uncommon. It's actually a coping mechanism that we do because we're being used. That's difficult to hear. It's either that or complain of a headache. Take your pick. Did you know Even within a marriage, the beautiful one-flesh union can turn easily into a form of sexual abuse and dysfunction. I'm going to go out on a limb right now and say that I believe the number one reason why marriages end in divorce is because something has gone horribly wrong in the bedroom. Because marriages that have real intimacy, they don't get divorced. That would be a tragedy. Christopher West, a terrific teacher of Theology of the Body, the little book that Trent showed you, says our relationships with our spouses regarding intimacy require great patience and listening, which sometimes can take years to mature. He likens it to a dance between spouses. At first we step on each other's feet and we are really, really clumsy. And this is normal. But through forgiveness and a lot of trial and error, this stumbling can turn into a beautiful dance. And I couldn't agree with Christopher anymore, because I see the results in our marriage firsthand. Our dance is not perfect, but it is so much better than it was.
Well, what does this look like to you? If you found this on the floor, walking down the hall, what does this look like? It looks like garbage, right? You pick this up, you throw it in the garbage. Okay? 2 people in the last 70, 80 years have come by and they have said, you mustn't throw this away. That echo that my wife was talking about, we walk around broken, yes we do, but that echo is in there. Our goodness is in here. And Jesus comes to redeem us. So Hugh Hefner, rest his soul, took this out of the garbage many years ago, right? And because we were raised on the starvation diet gospel, he got it right. The fact that, we have to take this out of the garbage. But where did he go so terribly wrong? He took it out of the garbage and he showed it to us just like this. And he says, do you want to see it? Do you want to see it? Do you want to see it? And because we were raised on the starvation diet gospel and we're hungry, we said, yeah, I want to see it. We want to see that. And as we mentioned earlier, pornography is our culture's wallpaper. Okay? John Paul II took this out of the garbage as well. And he said, you mustn't throw this away. JP2 says the problem with the world today is not that it overvalues the body and sex, but rather the modern world fails to see how valuable the body and sex truly are. Christ came into the world to redeem us. Yes. He also came to restore creation to the purity of its origins. This has to come out of the bottom, or out of the garbage. We are in need of a new sexual revolution, and the theology of the body is it. This paper reveals to us who we really are, and we have to enter into what Jesus did for us on the cross. And our goal, with Jesus' help, is to restore our brokenness back to the purity of our origins. Our bodies tell a story. Our bodies tell a story. So we've looked at the different kinds of love. We've looked at the definition of love. But what does love look like in the world today? What might it look like? I suggest to you, and we're running short on time, so I'm just going to kind of go through this as quickly as I possibly can. There are 4 pillars to determine what love is and what must be present for it to actually be love. It must be free, it must be total, it must be faithful, and it must be fruitful. It's got to be free. I can't manipulate her. I can't coerce her. I can't physically take advantage of her. Spousal union has to be free. And I want you to think about this for a second. This is something that I had to learn. We talk about the man's desire, right? And I kind of feel like I'm like 7-Eleven, open all the time. How much more does my yes mean when I respect her no? To her. How much more does my yes mean when I respect her no? And you know what happens? She starts to respond to my yes. And I think you mentioned about a dance earlier, right? Stepping on people's feet, each other's feet, pretty soon we start moving together. Okay? You can't, it's free. You can't buy it on a street corner. You can't take it home from a bar under the influence, blah, blah, blah. Okay? Total. The total gift of self. Men, the semen that's inside of us is who we are. In love, there must be a giver and there must be a receiver. And I mentioned earlier that I realized that I can't make a total gift of myself to myself. I have to make the gift to her. And she has to open herself up to the gift. It's in Theology of the Body, all about the contraception thing. We can't put a barrier between that. It has to be a total gift of self. It must be faithful. Jesus says in the Great Commission, go therefore, baptize all nations in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and I will be with you always. He's always there with us. I have to be faithful to her. Okay? And we have to be fruitful. Have to be open to life. So, a whole bunch of love stuff. In order to know for sure that it is love, it must be free, it must be total, it must be faithful, and it must be fruitful. If those four pillars are present, that's love.
All right, so we're just going to close up now, but I'm going to kind of share with you guys a few practicals to help you. Some of you might be sitting here thinking to yourself, that was a lot of information, and it was. We really opened ourselves up to you guys, and I hope that you're receptive to it. I want to share with you, lost my spot. About 10 years ago in Grand Rapids, we had this little old priest come and visit us, and he was a traveling priest, okay? And I watched him as he walked up to the amble, and he walked with little tiny, those little tiny steps, and I just thought, oh, here we go. Like, when those traveling priests come, you just sort of like, you're going to check out. St. Joseph's Catholic Church that day was set on fire by a little priest by the name of Father Reiser. Eucharistic adoration, we were literally, after he was done talking, he literally took a match and just went right on our congregation. We were not prepared for it, but we reacted. We literally ran to sign up. He had us so convinced about Eucharistic adoration, and that has been a mainstay in my life, and it's because of him. He's baptized some of your children, hasn't he? Yeah, he's pretty awesome. He's no longer with us. I know you know that. That's but that's what he did. So use your Eucharistic adoration chapel. Use that. That's a practical. Another thing too, and I want to scream this during Mass, during the offertory. Offer yourself with Jesus on the cross. Take all of your sorrows, all of your joys, all of everything, everything that's going on in your life, because Jesus wants it. I once heard Father Mike Schmidt say, put it all in a wheelbarrow. Just run up to the altar and just go like this. Do that. Take it all because Jesus wants it. He wants to help you. He wants to heal your wounds. He also said you could also form it into a little basketball and take a shot right onto the altar. So these are just some helpful things for all of you. Obviously confession, that just goes without saying. This wonderful sacrament where you can just pour yourself out. I hope that you have lots of opportunities to do that here at this church. You have wonderful priests, and that's a blessing, total blessing. So I think we're just going to wrap up with that. We want to thank you guys. It was awesome to come and talk with you and see all these happy faces, and thank you for making eye contact with me when I got kind of nervous and I had to say something important. So I know that you guys have some pieces of paper and that you might have wrote some questions down that we'd be glad to answer.
So if you do have any questions, come put them bring them, or I'll pass this around, or give me a wave and I'll anonymously ask a question. I do have a question. How does it seem that your own children have benefited from what you've learned, from your mistakes?
Well, I can tell you emphatically, we have a room in our house. We had two homes. We had a house in town, and the house we had a screened-in four-season porch. And one of the things that, as we went through all these problems, like I mentioned earlier, who was I going to talk to? But she's the one that I talked to about all these problems. I mean, I would tell her exactly how I would feel. I'd tell her exactly how I was experience things. And it so happened that in these conversations, if I'm traveling so much, when I come home, we invite our kids to come and sit with us. And we would sit for hours at night, and we thought, you know what, we're having these conversations, why not educate our children in the process? So our children have heard everything that we've told you here tonight. Our youngest is in 9th grade. Doesn't quite understand everything yet, our youngest one, but there's nothing that we hide from him. So I guess, and if you want to add something else, you can, but for me, I would just say, as you're raising your kids and you're going through these things, encourage them to come and sit, and sometimes they never said anything. Other times they asked questions. We didn't hide anything from them. We thought, you know what, we're learning this, and both of us would have said, holy cow, if we'd have known this 35 years ago, we'd have been much better off, so why better not give our kids this information now?
You can just yell.
Do you feel like your children have a better shot? Like, is it translatable that you think they have a better shot at doing a better job than you folks? Like, does it make a difference?
I think that it's actually made quite an impact on them. I know that our youngest Darby, and you guys don't know who she is, but she's a little spitfire, and she's pretty solid. Her foundation is solid, and if she sees any of her friends, kind of maybe doing the wrong thing, she's not afraid to talk to them. She'll just say something to them in a very nice way, and that takes a lot of courage, because those are all your peers. And so when I see that happening, it makes me so happy, because I think, oh, she's listening. She's not totally, disregarding everything that we say. So she takes it to school, and she's able to talk about it with other kids.
And one of the interesting things that happens too in regard to this is, because of these conversations, our kids come home and they tell us, we're not pimping them for information, but they're telling us what's going on in school. They're telling us what the kids are doing. And we can teach them. For example, with the 4 girls, I tell my 4 girls they're never dating a hockey player. They're not. And they go, come on, well, what are you talking about? I said, you're not, because I know what they're all about. Yeah, but Dad, you were a hockey player. I know. I know what I was like at that age. I said, you're not dating a hockey player. So when they hear these stories, I can tell them exactly what's going on. And you know the stuff that's going on. And then the boy leaves, and they lose their virginity, and then I say, and now what? I told you what was going to happen, and it happened. So those conversations are, to me, they're priceless.
A question. Is the Me Too movement a sign that people want a sexual standard more than just a, quote, we consent, let's have sex? Any thought about that?
Well, I don't know how to quite answer that question, but I find the phenomenon of the Me Too movement to be kind of interesting and alarming at the same time. To me, what it points to is use. It's the opposite of love, and there's a lot of use happening, and there's a lot of sexual wounds that are out there, and it's building. You can feel it. Women just don't want to put up with it anymore. And some of it, I'm like, oh, like the Me Too movement at the Grammys, and the women were wearing close to nothing. And I'm like, well, what, do you believe in this Me Too movement, or are you just gonna show off your body? It's just like, it's kind of confusing to me. I understand why it's happening, And I see that some good can come out of it, because we need to look over, yes.
Define what the Me Too movement is, for
Oh.
us that don't understand.
Okay, I'm
how
sorry,
it is.
sorry about that. It's pretty much women who have been sexually abused, and it kind of started with the Harvey Weinstein, all the Hollywood starlets coming up with these stories that we're like, when we heard it, but then we're like not surprised at the same time, because it's just their lifestyles, and there are some horrifying stories, there really are. So I can understand that Me Too. I can see, but it's like, it can be so confusing because it's like, do you really believe it? But I do believe that women are just not, they don't want to be used anymore.
And just a last question, because unfortunately we are out of time. Somebody wanted to know what your conversation with the Epiphany middle school students were today. It was not this conversation, but it was a piece of it.
Yeah. So I wasn't at Mass that day. Father Reiser came up and talked 10 years ago. I was on the road. So my wife, I came home off the road trip and she said, "Oh, you gotta go to adoration." And my initial reaction was like, what is adoration? I didn't have any idea what it was. There wasn't an adoration chapel at St. Al's when I grew up. But I gotta tell you, today we just spoke to the kids about how wonderful adoration is, and we actually participated in adoration with the kids, and the kids came forward in God's presence. They were on their knees and they were singing some praise and worship songs. I started crying. It was so awesome to see these kids in adoration, in uniforms, on their knees in front of the altar. It was awesome. So if anything, I was so happy to be a part of that today. It was great.
Well, on behalf of all of us in Epiphany, we want to thank you for bearing your soul, your heart. Thank you so much. And again, we'll take maybe a 10-minute break, and if you want to continue the conversation, you're welcome to come back and sit in these chairs right here.